Hello everyone from Ukraine. You're watching Channel 24. My name is Andriy Drozda and our guest today is Soner Cagaptay, Senior Fellow at the Washington Institute and the Director of the Turkish Research Program at the Washington Institute too. Historian and author of many books, including his latest work, Sultan in Autumn, about the political power of Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Hello, Mr. Soner, and we are happy to see you and hear you, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Andriy. Thanks for hosting me on your show. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Good. Let us start about the phenomenon of Recep Erdogan as a successful politician. How does he remain a type of authoritarian leader in the country where there is still a strong opposition and elections, and there are still signs of democracy and elements of both Eastern and Western civilizations?
Turkish President Erdogan is one of the most consequential leaders in the country. He has been winning elections for almost 2 decades now. For quite a bit of this period, he won elections fairly, mostly on a platform of strong economic growth. That's Erdogan's bright side. He has lifted many people out of poverty. He has improved incomes and living standards in Turkey. And so he has a base of adoring supporters who love him for that. But Erdogan also has a dark side. He demonizes, brutalizes, and cracks down on demographics unlikely to vote for him. So he's also a polarizer. And I think he's among the inventors, in my view, of what I call nativist populist politics globally in the 21st century, together with Hungarian leader Orban, a model, nativist populist model that has been copied by effective leaders elsewhere in Europe and beyond. And in that regard, Erdogan goes after groups that he thinks will not vote for him, demonizes them and brutalizes them, and creates societal polarization. That's a kind of a Janus-faced politician who wins elections by delivering growth and also by being a polarizer. The model is no more working because Erdogan is no more delivering growth. Turkey's economy went into recession in 2018. This is the main reason why he lost elections for big cities in 2019. Istanbul and Ankara were won by the opposition. Luckily for President Erdogan, at the time, these were not national elections. If elections were held now, he would probably not win them. Elections in Turkey are scheduled for June 2023. So President Erdogan has about 6 to 8 months to recover economic growth, or at least to create a sense of relief. And I think that's one of the reasons why, although he supports Ukraine militarily and politically, he has also kept economic ties with Russia open, because he realizes that the investment and financial inflows he would get from Russia would not restore economic growth necessarily, because inflation in Turkey is almost triple digits. There are bigger macroeconomic problems, but the money that would flow from Russia, trade, tourism, investment, and oligarch money, would probably create a sense of relief. So that's why I think he's approaching the Ukraine war from quite a utilitarian perspective, all about, of course, winning elections again in 2023.
Okay, so elections are so important for him, next year's elections. I would like to ask you about your newest book. Why is it titled named as a Sultan in Autumn? You know, a link to Gabriel Garcia Marquez and his Autumn of the Patriarch is very clear to me, but it looks like Erdogan is very far from his political autumn. Despite the economic troubles in Turkey, he stays pretty successful negotiator between Russia and Ukraine, and he also spreads his influence among any other countries with Turkish historical heritage. So why do you think he is in his political decline?
It's a great, literary analogy, as you said, the idea that this is a powerful leader in the autumn of his political career. Everything is not going to be rosy for President Erdogan going forward, because in the absence of robust economic growth, in order to win elections, I think he's going to double down on his nativist populist politics. He's going to further brutalize vulnerable groups, for example, targeting women, Kurdish nationalists, liberals, liberal Alevi Muslims in Turkey, LGBTQ, and I think this will be his brand. He will double down on social conservatism at home. So that means a lot of groups will feel vulnerable and brutalized by him. He'll also become more autocratic. Even taking into account the recent developments, I think the next 6 months will be quite dramatic in Turkey. There will be, for example, blanket bans on social media and news coverage. So I think that it's not as if Erdogan is going to ride smoothly to victory to get there. I think he's going to really have to double down on some of these policies at home. And even then, victory is not guaranteed. Internationally, I think he's going to embrace more of a nationalist image, enter evergreen tensions with Greece. By the way, I do not think there will be a Turkish-Greek war, but it's very likely that tensions will rise because Greece will also have elections next year, almost at the same time as Turkey is doing them. So it's in the interest of politicians in Turkey and Greece, both create tensions in Turkish-Greek ties. And I also think Erdogan will use the Swedish accession to NATO, again, to boost his image as a leader who made Turkey respected again. So his brand is going to be that, he's made the whole world respect Turkey. And in this regard, his brand is going to be, he's going to say, I am the leader who can talk to Zelensky, Putin, and Biden. Do you want to pick me, a global leader, or do you want to pick the opposition, which has really never performed anything in terms of running this country? And so he's going to frame himself as the global leader who can navigate Turkey through the eye of the storm, and versus the opposition, which has not been in power for almost 20 years. It looks to me so similar to Orban's winning agenda in Hungary. Orban also had a large opposition, and he went after it, and he said, look, you can try them, but we have the risk of World War III next door, maybe even nuclear war. Do you really want to change horses while crossing the river, or do you want to stick to the tested and tried leader? That's Erdogan's platform. Whether or not he gets there, I think largely depends on the economy. He's never won nationwide elections when the economy was not doing well. So it's really important for him to cultivate financial inflows from Russia, to keep trade with Russia open, but also Turkey is a resource poor economy, and it's completely integrated to the European economy because of customs union in place between Turkey and the EU since 1996, and Turkey needs financial inflows to grow. So markets, Bismarck once famously said, Turkey is east if you come from the west, and it is west if you come from the east, which means markets, when they put money into Turkey, they don't just look at macro indicators. They also look at Turkey's direction. They want to know where it's going. And ties with U.S. are also important for Erdogan. He wants to create a narrative of good ties with Washington and President Biden, so the markets are not spooked over Turkey's direction. Overall, I am hopeful and optimistic about the course of democracy in Turkey. That's because Turkey has been having free and fair elections longer than has been Spain. Turkey has been having elections since 1950. There's strong democratic memory and resilience. So the next elections will be incredibly contested. And it's really, I think, simplistic to say this side or that side will win. I think they'll be incredibly contested and quite historic in the career of Turkish President Erdogan.
Interesting. So the only way to Erdogan to continue his political career is to slide down closer and closer to authoritarianism, to be a stronger political hand. And as far as I remember, as far as I know from his biography, he was much more liberal at the beginning of his political career when he was a mayor of Istanbul, and then he just became more and more conservative and authoritarian, and that was what makes him more similar to Orban. He was very liberal in his young years, and now he's a totally opposite to that kind of Orban.
I agree with you. I think there are a lot of similarities, and I think that, oftentimes people, since I live in the US and I do a lot of lectures here, people ask me if Turkey is like Russia and Erdogan is like Putin. I say no. Erdogan and Putin have a bond. Turkey and Russia are not allies. They have many differences. They disagree on almost everything, from Nagorno-Karabakh in South Caucasus to Russia's aggression on Ukraine, Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea, Cyprus, East Mediterranean issues. The two countries disagree on everything. But what is more, I think that in terms of its democracy, Turkey is not at all like Russia. it is like Hungary, another country where not only the leaders are similar, Erdogan and Orban, they were once liberals and they have crossed to the autocratic side, but another country that's similar to Turkey in the sense that it's not a dictatorship like Russia. It's also not a democracy. I think Turkey and Hungary are both countries, I would say, democracies that have fallen under autocrats, and they're trying to make a comeback. They have strong oppositions, big middle classes. In Hungary, this didn't work. Orban was able to, brand himself in such a way that Hungarians didn't want to change leaders, facing the risk of World War III next door. In Turkey, we'll see if the branding will work. I think Erdogan's branding will be quite similar to Orban's. It will only work, in my view, notwithstanding how much more autocratic President Erdogan becomes, if there is a sense of relief from economic problems. If inflation is in triple digits, and of course, macro indicators are terrible, it doesn't matter how autocratic he becomes. I think it's almost impossible for him to win elections. But if economy is showing signs of improvement, thanks to perhaps Russian money and also some other investment coming from the Persian Gulf, Erdogan is now trying to reset ties with United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, he might just barely win. So that's why I think it's really fascinating to keep watching the elections, because we probably won't know clearly who the winner will be until perhaps about a couple of weeks before the actual polls.
How would you describe the opposition that opposes Erdogan right now, and who would vote for them or against Erdogan? Are those the younger Turks, citizens of Turkey? Is there a generational gap between the voters who support Erdogan and who are opposing him?
There is, but before that, let me explain how the opposition is, because it's important. Again, a similarity to Hungary. The opposition is constituted by politically very different parties. You have everything from a small political Islamist faction to a secularist party, and Turkish nationalists and Kurdish nationalists and everything in between. I think for Turkish President Erdogan's luck for a very long time was that he was blessed by an opposition in which the gap between opposition groups was wider than the gap between Erdogan and the opposition itself. But he made a big mistake. From the perspective of his political survival, he switched Turkey's system from a parliamentary democracy in which you had a multi-party race to a presidential system in which you have a two-way race. In the previous system before 2018, nearly half a dozen parties ran, and as that happens in other parliamentary democratic races, in Germany, for instance, you don't need to win 50% to come to power. You just have to become the plurality party. And so Erdogan's party, as the plurality faction, always won the elections. But after the switch to a presidential system, now you need to get 50%. And that's become really hard for him. But it's also taught the opposition a lesson. The opposition realized that if they don't unite, they can never get to 50%. So they ignore their differences, kind of, decided to come back together. They fielded a joint candidate in the 2018 presidential elections. It didn't work out. But with the economic recession in 2019, opposition putting together joint candidate for big cities in mayoral elections worked. So now the opposition has learned a lesson. They will win if they are united. And so the six-party coalition has come together. President Erdogan is a smart politician. He knows that he can't win if he doesn't divide the opposition. So I think going forward, he'll demonize, brutalize these groups, but also try to put cleavages in between them. And again, we'll see if that works out. And then coming to your question, there's a huge generational gap in terms of support for President Erdogan. So broadly speaking, until the economic problems rose, support in Turkey for President Erdogan was at a ratio of 1 for him, 1 against him, roughly speaking. That doesn't apply to under 40 generation. People who are under 40, that means that they were either born under Erdogan or they became of political voting age under him. So those citizens, and there's about 1 million people in Turkey in every age group, so there's about 40 million people, half of which are voters, and more will become voters from that demographics. 40 million people who simply don't remember Turkey before Erdogan. So obviously Turkey in 20th century was not a wonderful place. It had economic problems, corruption, the Kurdish issue, and Erdogan's brand for a long time was that he was an improvement over these problems, and when he delivered economic growth, people believed it. But for the under 40 demographic in Turkey, they look at this and they don't remember Turkey in the 20th century. They only read about it in history books. And they only look at Turkey now. It doesn't look like a great place to live. You have near triple-digit inflation. There is increased Jacobin top-down social conservatism. The president wants to shape the country's citizens in his own image. Turkey is a very sophisticated and diverse demographic, completely universally literate. A lot of people are well educated. And so people simply, especially young people, don't want to fall under this vision. So now you have brain drain. A lot of people are leaving. And I think, of course, for Erdogan, the challenge will be not winning the older voters. It will be winning the hearts and minds of the younger voters. So he's got huge challenges against him, which is why I call him Sultan in Autumn. Yes, he's very powerful. He's the most powerful elected Turkish leader. But at the height of his power, he's facing the biggest challenges, from the economy to demographics, that do not align with his political trajectory.
And yes, and Turkey is a country with a large number of population, about 85 million people. Right. It's very significant on the economic market of Europe and this central, even in the Middle East region. It's very significant and important country. And how does it happen that it was everything very good? The economy was fine, was going up, and even the name of your book from 2014 was titled as The Rise of Turkey. The Rise
yes.
of Turkey. The
21st. Of my scholarship. That's great.
Yeah, the 21st century's first Muslim power. It was all about the rise. What happens since then? What went wrong, actually, is that now we have such a big number of inflation and economic decline?
So my book you mentioned, Rise of Turkey, is the first book in a quartet of volumes I have published on Turkey under President Erdogan. The first book was about a very positive story. You know, when Erdogan came to power for about 10 years, he delivered phenomenal growth in the context of Turkish history. Since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I, Turkey had never seen 10 years of unbroken growth. That happened under Erdogan. So incomes increased, living standards improved. When President Erdogan came to power, for instance, infant mortality rate in Turkey was comparable to pre-war Syria. That's pre-war Syria, of course. Now, Turkey's infant mortality rate is comparable to Spain. So average Turk used to live like a Syrian. Average Turk started to live like a Spaniard, which is why he built a base of adoring supporters. So, and I wrote at the time, at the end of this book, quite optimistic. I said, President Erdogan, you have done a great job. You have transformed Turkey into a middle-income economy. Now you should write a liberal democratic constitution to enshrine these changes and to make it a consolidated democracy. I don't think Erdogan read my book, so he decided to go the opposite path, and I think we saw him become more autocratic and also at the same time make not as good economic decisions. His son-in-law, put in charge of the economy, I think pretty much drove the Turkish economy to the ground. So you have changes in economic policy. And then, of course, the fact that Turkey's investment environment changed. The first 10 years, Turkey attracted, under Erdogan, record amounts of foreign direct investment. It's also because Turkey was at the time in accession talks with the European Union. When the talks with the European Union stopped, international companies stopped investing in Turkey. Also, the hot money that was coming into Istanbul stock market in terms of portfolio investment dried away. And then finally, of course, the pandemic, as has been the case elsewhere, nothing to do with President Erdogan himself, has driven up inflation, supply chain issues, and overall Turkey's trade patterns. Erdogan is an amazing politician. He can create opportunity even out of crisis. For instance, the Ukraine-Russia war. He supports Ukraine, and I think Turkey supports Ukraine militarily 100%. I think Turkey will do everything to make sure that Kiev never falls under Moscow's rule. But Erdogan has created opportunity. He's realized that with sanctions against Russia, Turkey is now an outlet to Russia, to global economy, and to European economies. Notwithstanding President Erdogan's vision about Turkey's place in the world, whether it's a European country or a Middle Eastern country, there's a fact. Turkey's economy is completely integrated with that of the European Union. So I actually think there will never be a Turkish-European divorce. But that also means Turkey is a gateway to Europe for Russian companies. Turkish trade with Russia has increased. The number of Russian companies established in Turkey was about 10 before the Ukraine war. Now it's 100. A lot of money is coming in. So he's hoping that this will provide, a relief for a sense of relief for the voters because of the fact that Turkey is now benefiting as the middleman between Europe and Russia in terms of trade, and also facilitating tourism and other investment flows that will help restore economic growth in the next 6 months.
Well, yesterday I heard the speech of Vladimir Putin given in Valdai conference, and he was very sympathetic there to President Erdogan. He made a lot of compliments and so on. Why do you think there is such a strong bond between them, between Erdogan and Putin?
Look, if you look at the Ukraine war, Turkey's policy in the war is not ideal for Putin, right? Yes, Turkey sells Ukraine weapons, including Bayraktars, which have, in my view, together with poor Russian military planning and mud, prevented the collapse of Kiev at the beginning of the war, or its fall into the hands of the invading Russian forces. I think Turkish drones played a significant role in making sure that Kiev did not fall. So when Putin looks at this, he doesn't like it. Turkish support to Ukraine has prevented Putin from achieving his key goals, and still do. The Turkish drones played a significant role, for instance, in the sinking of the Moskva, another important defeat, humiliating defeat for Putin. But at the same time, Putin also knows that if Turkish-Russian trade links are open, that provides Russia with a backdoor to avoid Europe and US-led sanctions. And so he's still cultivating President Erdogan. The two leaders have also power-sharing deals, very soft, tenuous, in Nagorno-Karabakh, where they support opposing sides. Turkey supports Azerbaijan, Russia supports Armenia. There are power-sharing deals in Libya. Turkey supports the Tripoli government, the internationally recognized government. Russia supports the forces of General Haftar in the east. Tenuous power-sharing deals in Syria. Turkey supports rebels. Obviously, Putin supports Assad. All these are tenuous, and I think what Putin wants is, he thinks this is not actually for him, not ideal, but optimum. I actually think that Putin already has a horse in the Turkish elections, and that is President Erdogan. Putin wants him to win. He knows that if Erdogan wins, they will have further power-sharing deals. And so we saw, for example, a large transfer to the Turkish economy from Russia during the summer. Supposedly, this was to be used for the construction of the Akkuyu nuclear power station in southern Turkey. It's built by Rosatom, a Russian company. This is not a sanctioned company, so it was a legal transfer. But $5, maybe $10 billion came to the Turkish economy. Before the summer, the prediction by analysts was that the economy was going to collapse. It did not. Not only the wire transfer that came in for the construction of the nuclear power station, but also significant tourism, investment, trade from Russia, and oligarch money coming in. I think the Turkish central bank has an inexplicable amount of nearly $25 billion that appeared in the coffers of the treasury. I think much of this is Russian money. So yes, you're right. Putin said in Valdai that Erdogan, is his favorite leader. I think he wants to keep Erdogan in power, and if Erdogan wins elections, he'll probably be grateful to Putin somehow that Putin helped him get the victory. It's fascinating because I think the viewers should understand that Turkey's Ukraine policy is not black or white. I think Turkey is pro-Ukrainian but not anti-Russian, and that's really hard to explain, but I think the dynamics behind it are that economically you have ties between Turkey and Russia, but politically and militarily Turkey is on the side of Ukraine, of course.
And does Turkey or President Erdogan have a vision for the future of Crimea, given its historical presence of Turkey on this Crimean peninsula?
Yeah, very significant. I would say that Turkey was one of the first countries that objected to Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea. It has to do with Crimea's historic Tatar community, expelled from this peninsula by Stalin to Central Asia. Of all the nationalities and groups expelled by Stalin from their homelands, Tatars were the only group not allowed to return to Crimea after the death of Stalin. Everybody else could come back home, Chechens, Volga Germans, not Tatars. That's because Moscow always saw Crimea as a strategic outpost, where it can maintain a deep water navy. It's not frozen during the winter. It provides Russia with access to the warm seas, and it saw the Tatars return as a threat. The Tatars were allowed to return to Crimea only after the fall of the Soviet Union and after Ukraine became independent and sovereign. So Turkey, of course, supported Tatars' repatriation to their homeland and will never accept Russia's annexation of Crimea or other parts of Ukraine illegally. And I think kind of zooming out, it's not just that Turkey has ethnic affinity for Tatars. The Crimean Khanate was a significant ally of the Ottoman Empire. It was the only territory that joined the Ottoman Empire not as a subject, but as a part of a commonwealth. It was considered an equal partner. In fact, in the 19th century, the last male heir to the Ottoman dynasty almost got killed, and it looked like for a while the dynasty would have no remaining heirs. And one thinking was that the heirs of the Crimean Khans could become Ottoman sultans. So the relationship between Ottomans and the Crimean Tatars is quite intimate. But zooming out, it's also about strategy and regional politics. It's about Black Sea environment. So the Black Sea is an interesting sea. It's supposedly open sea, but it's not. Access to it is guided and regulated by the 1936 Montreux Treaty. It's a convention signed in a Swiss city named after it. And the treaty says that only littoral states can maintain large and permanent navies on the Black Sea. So non-littoral states can send in ships, but they can't stay there forever, and their tonnage is limited. So that means the Black Sea is effectively shared by all 6 littoral states: Turkey, Georgia, Russia, Ukraine, Romania, and Bulgaria. But guess what? Only 2 of these states, Turkey and Russia, have large navies. So the Black Sea is technically a Turkish-Russian condominium. Erdogan and everybody else in Ankara know that Russia is the militarily superior power. It has nuclear weapons. It has a larger navy, though we have seen that its military is not that great. But still, the Turkish view of the Black Sea is that Turkey needs to be best friends with everybody else around the Black Sea in order to build a bloc against Russia. That explains why Turkey has excellent ties with Ukraine, but also with Georgia, Moldova, Bulgaria, and Romania. In fact, as you know, Turkey has a visa-free travel arrangement with Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia. It would probably have the same arrangement if Bulgaria and Romania were not in the EU. So there's sort of a Black Sea Schengen established by Turkey, a visa-free travel zone. And I think this underlines Turkey's vision of its partnership with Ukraine. Ukraine is an important part of Ankara's vision to make sure that Turkey is not overwhelmed by Russia, its historic competitor, and therefore Ankara will do everything, I can assure you, everything to make sure that Kiev never falls under Moscow's rule. So I would say Turkey's support to Ukraine politically and militarily is at 100%. Turkish-Russian ties is a different story. That's why I said Turkey is pro-Ukrainian, but also not anti-Russian.
It's important to know. And what is the Turkey's role in the negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia, other 2 countries that are in war right now? What are the chances about the future project? I'm speculating right now, but the chances of building a gas pipeline from Azerbaijan through the Turkey to European Union, how possible is that, given that such a project would undermine Russian energy monopoly?
So now there's something called the Middle Corridor. It's that the Northern Corridor is the energy corridor that runs from Central Asia and Russia to Europe. European policymakers are realizing that this is not a strategically reliable one. So the Middle Corridor is the energy corridor that would run from Central Asia through the Caspian Sea and Azerbaijan and Caucasus to Turkey and to Europe. There are already pipelines on this route from Azerbaijan to Georgia to Turkey, so bringing Azeri gas and natural gas and oil to Turkish and European markets. Turkish natural gas grid is connected with the European grid. There are plans to build pipelines now to maybe behind the Caspian to Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. Both of those countries are also realizing that maybe they're overly dependent on Russia. So the issue is, can there be also cooperation between Turkey, Armenia, and Azerbaijan? I think there's a great opportunity, maybe an historic one. It's because Putin is distracted And so for a very long time, the Russian policy was to keep Nagorno-Karabakh as a frozen conflict. If it's frozen, there's reason for Russia to be present militarily in the South Caucasus. And of course, that means that Russia has its imperial presence going back to the early 19th century in the South Caucasus. Azerbaijan recently won a war against Armenia, took parts of occupied Azerbaijan and also Nagorno-Karabakh from the Armenians, and the ceasefire agreement was signed. Now, Turkey and Armenia and Azerbaijan are trying to normalize their ties for the first time. This will be a huge development, because if there is no more frozen conflict, if Azerbaijan and Armenia get along, and Turkey and Armenia have normal ties, it means that there's no reason for the Russian military to be based in Armenia. Russia has 2 bases in Armenia, has military presence there. This is quite significant, because for the first time since the Treaty of Gulistan in 1813, when the Russians invaded South Caucasus, the raison d'etre of Russian military presence would cease to exist. Now, typically, if Russia saw that normalization was coming in South Caucasus, Putin would trigger conflict, because he wouldn't want this frozen conflict to disappear. But now he's so occupied in Ukraine that this is an opportunity for Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey to normalize, and I hope it happens. And if it did, of course, for the first time in 200 years, the raison d'etre for Russian military presence in South Caucasus would cease to exist. I think normalization would not necessarily bring forward a new pipeline. Pipelines already exist, but it would create a trade corridor, because the shortest route from Turkey to Central Asia goes through Armenia, and it would create a trade corridor of highway and rail links, so Turkey would have direct trade access via Armenia, first to Azerbaijan and then to Central Asia. I think it would be a great game changer. It's why the US government supports this normalization, and President Erdogan, I think, is interested in normalization as well. So hopefully this will take place.
And considering the historical ties of Turkey with other Turkish nations as Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, how possible it is that under the Turkish influence another union will be created, the union of the countries with this historical bonds and ties that I have mentioned?
So I think this is quite sometimes a romantic idea that Turkey, Azerbaijan, and countries in Central Asia are ethnic brothers, and therefore they should come together in a political union. I think the issue is, how much do these people understand each other? Turkish and Azerbaijan are mutually intelligible, but east of the Caspian Sea, the Turkic languages are not mutually intelligible with Turkish. Native speaker of Turkish will understand 90% of Azerbaijani when spoken, but maybe 40% of Turkmen and 10% of Uzbek and maybe 1% of Kyrgyz and Kazakh. So the further east you go, the less intelligible Turkish becomes with these languages. And until recently, of course, we saw Russia build influence in Central Asia. I would say Russia was the dominant country, followed by China. Turkey came probably number 3. Now, of course, starting with Kazakhstan, I think Central Asian countries are nervous. They are afraid, especially Kazakhstan, that they could be the next Ukraine targeted by Russia. And so they're kind of trying to balance this out. I would say we'll see an improvement of ties between Turkey and Central Asia, especially if the Azerbaijani-Armenian relations normalize and the trade corridor is established from Turkey to Azerbaijan directly to Central Asia. But I think a political union is really far, far away. There are many political differences between Turkey, economically part of Europe, a liberal democracy until recently, and countries of Central Asia. But I think you'll see Central Asian countries hedging or playing Turkey and other countries to make sure that they're not as completely dominated by Russia economically, politically, and militarily. So it's an opening of improved ties between Turkey and Central Asia, but I would say a political union is really far away at this moment.
You already mentioned that you don't believe in the divorce of the West and Turkey. What would you say about the future membership of Turkey in European Union? Because this question is on the table for dozens of years, for decades actually, from the late 80s, I would say, yes?
Yeah,
And what would be the future? When we will see the answer to this question?
So after he came to power, President Erdogan, at the time Prime Minister of Turkey, carried out significant reforms, political reforms towards EU accession. And but the European Union, not the EU, but the two largest countries in the EU, France and Germany, told Turkey that even if Turkey fulfilled all of the EU's expectations, the accession talks would still not end up in membership. They said, these are open-ended. We don't know if they'll end up in membership. That seemed dishonest to Turkey, because no country that had been in accession talks with the EU was ever told that these talks would not end up in membership. It's assumed once countries start accession talks that if they do their homework, they join the European Union. There has never been a case where the EU started accession talks with a country and did not offer full membership to it. In the case of Turkey, at the time, French President Sarkozy especially, and then Angela Merkel later on, told Turkey that talks would not result in full membership. That kind of, I think, eroded Turkish appetite for accession talks. And so Turkey turned to other regions, the Middle East, and now, of course, Eurasia and the Balkans, Western Balkans, not part of the EU, and Black Sea countries where it has built significant influence. So I think that at this stage, taking into account established enlargement fatigue in the EU, not even Turkey, which is a big country of almost 85 million people, but even smaller countries such as Serbia, Montenegro, Albania are having difficulty in convincing the EU that it should embrace them. I think at this stage, Turkey's EU accession is really far, far away. It will probably not happen in this decade, but politically, while Turkey is not on the table, economically it is part of Europe. It's due to customs union with the European Union, and it's really an interesting relationship. I think if you look at how, for instance, the countries that oppose Turkey's EU accession most inside the EU is Austria. Austria is the only country that says it opposes Turkey's accession. Even if Erdogan is ousted, Turkey becomes a democracy again. It says no to Turkey, and yet Austria is the second biggest investor in Turkey.
Sorry for interrupting. It's all because of the battle near Vienna. That is why Austria is opposing.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And Austria sees itself as the guardian of Europe against Islam, and I think it's quite a racist position. But Austria is also the second biggest investor in Turkey after the Netherlands. So the country that opposes Turkey most is also the country that invests almost most in Turkey. So that's why I wanted to highlight the economic bonds. They're very powerful. For instance, Turkey is part of European supply chains, and Europe is part of Turkish supply chains. Turkey exports a lot, but it needs to buy from Europe, for instance, to build cars, and then it sells these cars back to Europe. So you have deep economic integration. I don't think this will go away. Politically, I think Turkey will not join the EU, but now you have a new concept called European Political Community. Ukraine is also part of it. The UK, after Brexit, is a part of it. I think that what we're going to see is a Europe of many concentric circles. You have an inner core of fully integrated countries that share the euro and the Schengen zone. You have an outer core of some countries that opt out of this. They don't want to have the euro. The Swedes, the Danes, or they're not in the Schengen zone, Romania and Bulgaria. And you have a third circle of non-member countries who are in accession talks or in customs union with the European Union. And that includes the UK, Turkey, Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. So I would say Turkey is going to be in the third circle together with Ukraine, but more integrated with Europe than Ukraine is, and has, because of its historic ties also, and as well as closer to Europe in some ways because of the presence of a very large Turkish diaspora in Europe, in Germany and other places.
The next question would be about the defense strategy. As we know, Turkey is the member of NATO, and it is using a lot of weaponry systems from the Western countries, including USA. The pilots of Turkish air forces are flying by F-16s aircrafts. How could it happen that Turkey decided to use Russian anti-aircraft systems S-400, and how did that decision influence the relationships between Turkey and the United States?
So Turkey's decision to purchase Russian-made S-400 missile defense system, I would say, is one of the most fateful foreign policy decisions made by President Erdogan. And this decision was made by Erdogan in the aftermath of the failed coup attempt against him in 2016. At the time, it was a very vulnerable Erdogan. The coup attempt almost succeeded. It failed. But after the coup, the first country that reached out to Erdogan among large powers was Russia. Putin called them the next day. It took the US 4 days to make a call. That was Secretary Kerry at the time, Secretary of State, and not even President Obama. So I think Erdogan felt very vulnerable. I would say Erdogan's first visit after the coup should have been to Brussels, to a NATO summit showing support to democracy in Turkey. Instead, he went to St. Petersburg. Putin invited him. This was quite fascinating because at the time, Turkey and Russia were fighting a proxy war in Syria. Turkey had Turkey was supporting armed rebels. Russia was supporting Assad government. It was as if they were on the brink of a war. As you mentioned, I have written a number of books on Erdogan. One of them is called Erdogan's Empire. This is on his foreign policy. For this book, I counted the number of times Turkey and Russia have fought. There are 17 large-scale wars between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire from the time of Catherine the Great until the collapse of the Russian Empire with the Bolshevik revolution. Guess who started all these 17 wars? It's Russia. Guess who lost them overall? It is the Ottoman Empire and the Turks. So in Syria, at the time of just before the coup in 2015 and 16, it looked like the 18th war was going to start between Turkey and Russia, and you didn't need a crystal ball to figure out who would win. But then something really dramatic happened. Following the failed coup attempt, Putin decided to bury differences in Syria. He invited Erdogan because he realized this was an opportunity for him to peel Erdogan away from Washington. While Turkey's Western allies were slow in reaching out to Turkey to voice support for democracy, Putin invited Erdogan, and Erdogan's first visit after the coup attempt was to Russia, Turkey's historic nemesis, the country that has defeated Turkey 17 times. And very symbolically, Putin hosted Erdogan not in Moscow, the Russian capital, but in St. Petersburg, the imperial capital. And guess where Putin hosted Erdogan? In St. Petersburg, at the Konstantinovsky Palace, built by Catherine the Great. So I think Putin's messaging was to Erdogan was this. He said, look, my predecessor, Catherine the Great, started tradition of bullying you Turks. I, Putin the Great, can end it. Let's have a handshake. They had a handshake that meant the end of the proxy war in Syria, but it also meant that from then on, Turkey and Russia would have these soft power sharing deals in Nagorno-Karabakh and Libya. And of course, Putin's platitudes don't come for free. I think that he also established himself at that point as President Erdogan's protector. He probably told him and said, from now on, I have your back. We see that Putin indeed has Erdogan's back. The transfer that came into Turkish economy past summer, including the one that we know for the construction of the nuclear power station and other capital inflows, have helped prevent a collapse of the economy and also collapse of President Erdogan's power across Turkey. So Putin clearly supports him. But of course, his platitudes don't come for free. So if you had to ask me and say, Soner, when do you think Putin dangled to Erdogan the idea that he should purchase S-400 missile defense system? I would say at the Konstantinovsky Palace meeting 2 weeks after the coup attempt in 2016. Putin probably told Erdogan and said, I have your back. We can have deals in Syria, Libya, South Caucasus, but you need to buy this. Putin knew that if Turkey bought this system, it would cause a rupture in Turkish-US ties. That's exactly what has happened. Turkey has been sanctioned by the US Congress. It has also been kicked out of NATO's or US-led next generation fighter plane project called F-35. Turkish-US defense ties are in terrible shape. So Putin kind of killed multiple birds with one stone. He stole Turkey away from the United States. He created a permanent crisis in Turkish-US ties, and he also ended the war in Syria, basically, because Turkey is the largest anti-Assad force in Syria, and since 2016, Turkey has not been actively fighting the Assad regime. So in many ways, I think this was a coup de grace for Putin. It was very successful, as a strategist would do, but it's also, I think, the beginning of this bond between Putin and Erdogan, which survives to this day.
Very smart move from Putin. It explains a lot. This story explains a lot, actually. So my final questions would be about the role of the United States for Turkey today, and especially for President Erdogan. How important Washington and the United States and the relationships between those both countries are for Turkey right now?
So I think that the U.S. policy is now zooming out of Syria and the Arabian Desert and zooming into Russia and China. So the name of the game is great power competition. You know, it's no more a unipolar world. It's a multipolar world. You have countries, though not economically and militarily as powerful as the U.S. alone, can form a challenge to the U.S., including global challenges, China, and Europe-wide challenges such as Russia. So the U.S. views Turkey as a partner in great power competition. You know, Turkey is perhaps not the ally that it once was. U.S.-Turkish relationship has many problems, but I think the view in Washington is to keep Turkey anchored in NATO, and also to make sure that while the U.S. and Turkey may have differences in some, for instance, Syria, they also have aligned interests, for instance, around the Black Sea and Ukraine. I would say the Ukraine war has restored the sense of cooperation in U.S.-Turkish ties and alignment. And I think going forward, that will be the U.S. view of Turkey, a potential partner in great power competition against Russia, because the war in Russia has really changed the thinking in Washington, not just only towards Turkey, but also, I think, towards Eurasia in general.
Mr. Cagaptay, thank you so much for this dialogue, for your answers. It was extremely interesting and eye-opening conversation for me. Thank you for joining us today and for this dialogue, for this interview.
Thanks for hosting me, Andriy. I had a great time, and Slava Ukraini.
Heroyam Slava. Thank you so much. And thank you, our dear audience, for your time and that you are watching us. We hope to see you soon on our channel with our new guest.